and I hope that you all slept as well as I did. I think I could have gone on for a few days, but I'm glad to be here this morning. So for those who weren't here, we started out yesterday by talking about kind of the complexity of simplicity. Why is it so much more complicated than it seems at first glance? And so I said that what we were going to do next is kind of work our way inward and talk about interior simplicity. And we're going to do that for this session and then the next one. And then we'll kind of come back out again in the final session and talk about the implications of all of that for our outward practice of simplicity. So that's kind of where we've been and where we're going. So for today, I would like to allow Thomas Kelly to start us off. Is that name familiar? Thomas Kelly, the Quaker writer, wrote a fantastic classic little work called A Testament of Devotion. And I want to point out before I get any further that I'm going to do something a little strange. I'm going to use the terms poverty and simplicity interchangeably, not because they mean the same thing. And I talked about that a little bit yesterday, how poverty is a kind of complete renunciation, and simplicity is this sort of plate spinning act, you know. And I don't think either one is harder than the other, or more complicated than the other, or more challenging than the other, but they are different. And so I'm not trying to suggest in using these interchangeably that they mean the same thing, but to say that simplicity as third order people is our way of living the ideal of poverty in the world, okay? So when I use them interchangeably, it's to say that this is our poverty. So the other thing I want to say is that when I give you a somewhat lengthy quotation, I'll give it to you twice, because when you don't have the text in front of you, it's easy to just sort of have it pass by and not really get it. So here's a little quotation from Kelly's book, A Testament of Devotion, and it's from a chapter called Holy Obedience. I have in mind something deeper than the simplification of our external programs, our absurdly crowded calendars of appointments through which so many pantingly and frantically gasp. These do become simplified in holy obedience. And the poise and peace we have been missing can really be found. But there is a deeper, an internal simplification of the whole of one's personality, stilled, tranquil, in childlike trust, listening ever to eternity's whisper, walking with a smile into the dark. I love that. So one more time. I have in mind something deeper than the simplification of our external programs, our absurdly crowded calendar of appointments through which so many pantingly and frantically gasp. These do become simplified in holy obedience, and the poise and peace we have been missing can really be found. But there is a deeper and internal simplification of the whole of one's personality, stilled, tranquil, in childlike trust, listening ever to eternity's whisper, walking with a smile into the dark. If the poverty of Francis and Clare were just about running around in rags, then there are plenty of people in my own city I could follow. Our domestic policy in America in the last few decades has created huge numbers of homeless people, many of whom suffer from mental illnesses, who would have had shelter and care at an earlier time, but who now live on the streets. Most of them are dressed in rags, and although each of them is God's own beloved, most of them don't have much of a following. Okay. So no, we admire Francis and Clare not mainly for their outward poverty, but for their inner poverty, their embrace of poverty, which they saw as embracing Christ. So for them, to embrace poverty was to embrace Christ. And maybe that's immediately obvious to you why those are the same thing, but it certainly hasn't been to me. Why? What's the connection between those two? What is inner poverty, outward poverty, Christ? And how do these things come together? I think this is what Kelly's getting at, and that's why I wanted to open with that statement of his. just that one snippet really, really kind of is the crux of it. There is a deeper and internal simplification of the whole of one's personality, stilled, tranquil, in childlike trust, listening ever to eternity's whisper. This is the state of someone who is intensely focused on God. And that's what's so attractive and compelling, to me at least, about Francis and Clare. And in fact, I think you could say this of all the saints. And it's interesting, one of the things that I think is so great about the saints is how different they are, right? I mean, you've got the kings and queens, and then you've got the holy fools, and like everything in between. But I think the one thing they all have in common is that intensity of focus. And that was certainly true of Francis and Clare. They knew exactly what they wanted out of life, and they were not going to let anything distract them from it. The Kelly quotation, as I mentioned, is from a chapter called Holy Obedience. And you're probably aware that our English word obedience comes from the Latin to hear, right? So to hear, to obey someone is to hear them, to really listen to them. And most of us, frankly, are listening to many voices at once, right? There's something, I don't know if you have this expression here, but we call it the mall effect. So you know how you're walking through a shopping center and each of the shops has their own music playing? And so as you're passing through them, you get all that music at once. And even if, in the extremely unlikely event that you actually liked each of those pieces that were playing, I mean, that's never going to happen, right? But even if it did, when you have 5 of them going at once, it's just noise, right? It's just noise. You can't enjoy any of them. You can't really attend to any of them. So the mall effect complicates our lives because each of these, because these different, musical pieces, I mean, they're not a chorus. They're all soloists, okay? And they all want to monopolize our attention with their own particular message. So we're each of us being sort of bombarded with these different voices and their messages all the time, right? Does this resonate? Yeah, okay. I didn't think I was the only one. So you have your own inventory, but I'd like to just mention a few of the messages that come to me from the culture I live in, and I'm guessing these will be very familiar to you as well. So, one message. Okay, so this religious thing, America's a religious country. Actually, America is a very religious country. It's just that some of our religions are very strange. This religious thing, you want to do that, fine. We can accept that. The culture. We can accept that, although Seattle is in the most irreligious part of the country. So, one of the great benefits of that is that when I'm late for church on Sunday morning, I can go up the freeway as fast as I want. No traffic ever on Sunday morning. But at any rate, be religious. Go to church on Sunday morning. We're okay with that. But just don't become fanatic. Don't get too into it, because that's kind of weird, and that makes us uncomfortable. Yeah. So in other words, don't be too hot. Don't be too cold. Go for lukewarm. You remember what Jesus said about lukewarm, right? I like hot. I can handle cold, but lukewarm makes me want to vomit, right? Now, I don't know about you, but the thought of making Jesus vomit does not make me happy or comfortable. But that's one of the voices. That's one of the messages. And I live with that all the time. I don't know if you do as well. But that whole don't be a fanatic thing, I honestly, I don't know how to do this without being a fanatic, which doesn't mean that I do it right, but I don't know how to do this partially. It's not because I'm so virtuous, it's just my temperament. I guess I have a kind of a fanatic streak to me, but whatever. Here's another one. If you took all that time you spend staring into space, in other words, praying, and went to the gym instead, you could have Michelle Obama's arms. And honestly, who doesn't want that? If you would just spend all that time you waste on God stuff, working out, then you could be a lot closer to the cultural ideal, right? Okay, no gym is gonna make me 25 again. But you could be, a better version of 52. However, I love how, I think it was St. Paul, I didn't actually look this up, but I think it was St. Paul, and I'm going to give it to you in the priceless King James Version. bodily exercise profiteth little. This is my excuse, right? I'm guessing that St. Paul never met a supermodel or a professional athlete because bodily exercise profiteth them a lot. However, even they must live with the reality of ashes to ashes and dust to dust. And so even if you do, get Michelle Obama's arms, one day they are going to be dust. And there was a movement, a kind of intellectual and artistic movement that came out really kind of came into its own after the Black Death, in which you had all of these people, this whole memento mori movement. Remember that you are mortal, and they would make spiritual practices out of this. There's a church in Rome. I don't know if maybe some of you have been there, where the crypt is all full of bones. The bones of the have you seen that? Yeah, it's amazing. It's really spooky. My students love it. But it's all full of bones, and the monks would actually they were friars. They were Capuchin friars, and they would go down there and they meditate on these. And the idea was think about the fact that you're mortal and live accordingly. There's a sign, in fact, at the end of it that says, what you are, we once were. What we are, you will be. That's a pretty sobering message. It's especially interesting to take a bunch of 20-year-olds and have them contemplate that sign for a moment, because it's just such an abstract idea. But, I really think this is a good spiritual practice, to think about one's death. Because when I think about, myself on my deathbed, I don't know if I'll have the luxury of a deathbed. I might end up, going a little too fast on the freeway Sunday morning or something like that and not be prepared. But hopefully I will have lived thinking about that moment and preparing for it so that, I don't look back on a life where I try to do so many different things, listening to the mall voices, that I didn't do any of them well. And I think that constantly kind of reminding ourselves of our mortality is a good way to avoid to later. So I'm not saying that exercise and work are not good things in their place. Just that listening to that multiplicity of voices in pulling us in different directions, we become, Kelly's pantingly and frantically gasping people who are running through life trying to figure out what they're doing all the time. I remember the moment, and maybe you had one like this too, where I realized that it would be humanly impossible to do all of the things that people were telling me I had to do. So you have to go over your bank statement every month. You have to, clean out your closets and move your off-season clothes into, nice storage thing. And then, do you know that you're supposed to wash your washing machine? Did you realize this? Seriously, I've just discovered that my supermarket in that washing section has a new product that you're supposed to insert into your washer because stuff builds up, or I don't know. I mean, who has time for this? Who has time to wash the washing machine? I don't have that kind of life. We need a way to filter out the voices that are trying to send us in so many different directions so that we can hear the one voice from the one who loves us perfectly and is calling us to our true path. That intensity of focus. Do you remember that scene in John's Gospel early on where the two disciples of John the Baptist come to Jesus? Yeah.
We did a Bible reflection on it this morning.
Brilliant! Thank you, God. Okay. So they come up to Jesus and they ask him, what do they say to him? You've just gone over this. Where are you staying, right? So just imagine this scene in kind of less biblical language, okay? So, they come up to him and he didn't say to them, why aren't you at work? Why aren't you at the gym? You obviously could use a little bit of a workout. Probably John was, I sort of imagine John. In the movies, he's always real buffed, John the Baptist, because he doesn't eat much and he's out there not having a very comfortable life. But why aren't you at work? Why aren't you at the gym? Shouldn't you be going over your bank statement? Or what's all that crap under the bed and when are you going to do something about it? No. Jesus says to them, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? I love it when Jesus just cuts through all the extraneous rubbish that people bring forward to him and gets right to the heart of it. Like just to switch forward a little bit in John's gospel, remember with Nicodemus? So Nicodemus comes and I'm sure he had practiced his speech, Teacher, Rabbi, we know that you're sent from God because no one could do all the stuff that you do unless God were with him. And Jesus, I'm imagining this, Jesus looks at him and says, Nicodemus, you are not even going to see the kingdom unless you're born from above. In other words, you're going to have to start all over. And Nicodemus says, I'm old, I cannot start over. But Jesus just cuts through the crap and gets right down to the point. And he does this with John the Baptist's disciples too. So I'm picturing them kind of trotting up to Jesus going, John said, yada, 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 Lamb of God, yada, 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 take away the sins of the world, etc. And so does Jesus say, he said I was the Lamb of God? Did he? What do you think? Do you think that's true? Did anybody else say that? What do you think that means? Jesus doesn't go through, and he doesn't get drawn in, right? What he says is, what are you looking for? But I think what that really meant is, what is the deepest desire of your heart? What is the deepest desire of your heart? So how do they respond? Well, what do the disciples say, though?
They asked him another question, so they said, but I can't remember what it was.
Where are you staying? Where do you live?
It seems unrelated to the
It does. I'm so glad you said that because that's exactly my point. I just picture them kind of looking at their feet going, I don't, where do you live? Because if somebody asks you, what is the deepest desire of your heart? How many of you think you could answer that off the top? I know where I would go with this, okay? I would say my desire is to find a form of chocolate that constitutes all by itself a balanced diet. This is what I desire. And then I can imagine Jesus' look. And so, okay, we'd go a little deeper than that. And I think one of the things that I really desire, even possibly more than chocolate, is serenity. I have this fantasy of being one of these people who sort of floats through the day. Serene, like those Buddhas that people have in their gardens, and just sort of floats from one thing to the next without becoming ruffled or disturbed, without checking the watch all the time and frantically and gaspingly and all of that stuff that Kelly talked about. But I don't have a very serene-making job. My job doesn't make me at all serene, and therefore I have fantasies about retirement. And I'm guessing that some of you have probably discovered what other people have told me, which is that retirement, you just get busier with other stuff. I don't know. At least there's that temptation to fill the days with other things to where you're still frantically gasping and panting and all of that. So, and besides, I'm only 52, so retirement is actually a ways off. And so that's why it's a fantasy and not a plan. But I do sort of dream of a life that is less pressured and less stressful. But God hasn't given me early retirement. God has not given me the lottery jackpot or even a good-sized inheritance. And I think I'm beginning to understand why. I think that what I'm really doing in my fantasies of life slowing down is kind of grasping at time in the way that people grasp at money and possessions. grasping at time. I want to possess more of it in a way that's not kind of, oh, God, just give me more time so that I could do more stuff for you. No, God, give me more time so that I can watch more episodes of my favorite sitcom and get more sleep. You know, I could be a real consumer of time. It's a kind of consumerist attitude that I'm taking toward it. A lot of us long for a less frenzied pace, a more sort of human pace, and I actually think that's a really healthy instinct. And there's a whole section, kind of subsection of books on simplicity that are devoted to this question of trying to get, one's life pared down to the point where it could be lived at a more reasonable pace. I have to say that I have shelves of those books. And I even was greatly embarrassed to discover that in some cases, in one case in particular, I actually had more than one copy. So the ironies of simplicity just multiply. It's troubling. It's troubling.
And have you had time to read them?
Actually, yes, for the most part. But I don't think that my lifespan will be such that I will be able to get through all of the books that I bought. Yeah, so that's a real, that one goes right to the heart. So thank you for that. But there is a lot to be said for this desire to sort of create some boundaries around ourselves, not say yes to every request, and learn how to not get sucked into a life that becomes totally out of control all the time. I think that's a good thing. But in my case, it's not really more time that I need. It's poverty that I need. For me, my job of teaching can feel like a trap at times because it is stressful. There's a lot of pressure associated with, preparing things to say and dealing with students' needs, particularly because I teach such large classes. Email is something that was supposed to simplify our lives, but I have come to believe that the only way I will get my inbox under control is to die and leave an away message. I'm sorry, I'm out of the office permanently, and I will never get back to you. Just another one of my fantasies. But I feel the job does sometimes feel like a trap. And so I get sucked into this attitude of, oh, if only I could escape, I could do amazing things. I could write more books for other people to accumulate and never read. I could do more talks. I could lead retreats. I could have this wonderful ministry, if I weren't teaching all the time. There's a wonderful book, one of his many, Rowan Williams wrote, called Silence and Honeycakes. Has anyone read that? Oh, that's great, isn't it? It's about the wisdom of the desert fathers and mothers. And one of the themes that he talks about is this need to resist the temptation that life could be so much better somewhere else, anywhere else than where we are. And so there's a wonderful quotation that has stayed with me. Abba Moses was apparently having a conversation on much these same lines with somebody, and his advice was this: go, sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything. I mean, just hearing that, you know that's really profound, right? So what are our cells? I mean, we're not living I presume none of you is actually living in a cave in the desert, but our cells can be anything that we feel trapped in, that we long to escape. So, it can be the job, it could be the marriage or any kind of serious relationship. It could be a ministry that we were excited about at one time and now it's just kind of eating us alive, or what have you. Anything that we long to escape can become a cell. But our cells can teach us everything. So, a couple of things that I have learned in my little cell at the University of Washington. One is that teaching is hard, especially if you're an introvert. I mean, there are introverts who are all shy and everything. I'm clearly not one of those, okay? I'm not shy, I don't get stage fright and all that sort of thing. But unlike extroverts who actually gain energy from being around people, introverts, even if they like being around people, still feel afterward like they've got to recover. So you go away and you dig a hole and you bury yourself in it and hope that nobody disturbs you for a couple hours while you try to come back to life, right? And so teaching, especially large classes, it's not kind of intimate like TV where, the camera's up close and you're kind of making little gestures like this. Teaching large classes is more like theater where it's all big and, like big gestures and loud voice and all that kind of stuff. And it's exhausting. And furthermore, with teaching, even though I really like at least 95% of the students I meet, who are dear, they're just so charming, they're so young and full of life and promise and anxiety and angst and all that. But I love them. But some of them are real whiners, And so, when I started teaching, I had a new respect for Moses. And for what it is to lead people through the wilderness and have them just bitch the whole way. Honestly. So that's one thing I've learned of myself. But for this very reason, one of the things my cell has taught me is that teaching is a path to poverty. It's a form of kenosis, of self-emptying. And so why is that? Well, it's because it brings me to the end of my resources. I mean, I have to provide every day for all those students, and I know that I don't have what they need. I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the time, I don't have the stamina, I don't have the patience or the self-assurance. I don't have what these people need. Okay, so I've already admitted that I've never known real material poverty. I had my little fling with renunciation of the world, but I always had the safety net under me. I always had somebody who would buy my bicycle. And so I don't know what it is to have a family that you have to feed day after day and have no money coming in. And there are a lot of people, I assume that the recession hit you too. There are a lot of my neighbors who have lost pretty much everything, and they have nothing to go with now, and they've got, their family keeps having needs, and they keep having bills to pay, and the mortgage and the rent or what have you, and there's nothing coming in. And I have no way of connecting to that because I've never been in that position. I've never been in the position of having a kid with asthma and knowing that I can't afford the medication that it would take to make them better. I've just never been there, but a lot of Americans have, and a lot of others as well. I say Americans just because we've been through this whole upheaval about healthcare. But anyway, I haven't been there, but I have been in the position of needing to provide for people day after day after day and knowing that I just don't have it. Claire, the church kept trying to make her a Benedictine, Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that wasn't her call. For all the Benedictines who might watch this, no, it's great. But not for Claire because it wasn't her call. And so she kept fighting for the privilege of poverty, which is an odd sort of phrase, isn't it? The privilege of poverty. And I think the reason is because, Claire wanted to experience the daily miracle of God's provision. And I think my sense of finiteness and limitation when it comes to my job means that I get to experience that too. This is what my cell has taught me. So every day that I teach, I begin with a prayer. You're going to have to pull this off again because I have no idea what to do. And every day I end with a prayer. You did it again. I thanks. That's about as much as I can say because it's every day that I teach. It's the miracle of the loaves and fishes all over again. That is priceless. That is a kind of radical dependency that, frankly, I would never seek on my own. If it were up to me, I would be smart enough and charismatic enough and capable and confident enough to just go in there and do it all myself, which would probably be a disaster. But I don't have any of those resources, so I can't. When I was in formation for the Third Order, I'd written in one of my reports about my struggles, say, in the daily office. And actually, while I'm on this subject, can I just ask you, do you have the requirement for a daily office each day? Okay, we do too. I think not every province does, but that's our requirement, and I struggle with it. I am just so not good at the daily office. And so my novice counselor said this to me: here's a form of the office that probably even you could manage. It boils it down to the essence, okay? Ready? You can memorize this. Morning prayer is whatever, and evening prayer is, oh well. Really, when it comes down to it, what else do you need to say? All right, so here's where I want to turn it over to you for a little bit. I would like to give you a couple of minutes to think about this and maybe jot a few notes down. What is your cell? You might have, several, but think about one. What is your cell, and what has it taught you? So take 2 minutes to think about that, and then we'll talk. Okay. What is your cell, and what has it taught you? All right. What is your cell, and what has it taught you?
My cell is working for my husband.
Is working for your husband?
Correct. We have a business, and so I work in it with him. So he's my boss.
Oh, interesting. Fraught situation, I would think. Fraught. With potential.
As I was writing this, what is my cell? I honestly put in the office, and then what has it taught me? And I've got a whole host of things there. I'm amazed. And the first one that sort of shines out to me is, like I say, shutting up.
My husband tried to teach me that. It hasn't worked yet. No, seriously, go ahead.
And but as I go on, opportunities, perseverance, patience,
Perseverance, yes.
teaching others, sharing and helping.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a little bit of revelation going on in the corner.
That's a lot. What else?
I think I've got a number of cells, but the one that I thought of was work. And I've been in a situation with a new boss who didn't appreciate the wonderful skills that I've got. How could she? How could she not? So I actually had to step back and look at, what's my place as a Christian in that workplace? What's my place in relation to her? And I saw that as a Christian I have to love the people I'm with. And so I started loving and praying for my boss and others at work. And it's amazing. From that I learned humility
It's a gift of advancing years, perhaps. But honestly, I think my students all imagine that I wish I were their age. Oh, poor middle-aged invisible woman. You'd probably love to be 20-something again, right? Whereas the truth is, if I woke up and I was 22, I would find something sharp and kill myself with it, because it's all too hard won. But it sounds like your cell taught you a lot about being a Franciscan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And gave me so much back.
Yeah. Yeah, set things in motion that ended up being really fruitful. Yeah. Yes. What were you going to say?
When my husband and I always had separate jobs, when we retired early, we felt called to a Christian healing centre as part of the community, where we did humble work, like in the kitchen and mowing lawns. Sparks flew between us. What we learned is to have our personalities identified, found they were quite different, made it understand why we could cope when we were working apart, or why we couldn't bring it together. So we had to learn a whole lot of new relating techniques, and also to rely on God.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to before, we relied on our own work.
That's, the thing about relationships, and lots of people have said this before me, and probably better than I will, but being in community, whether it's, a dyad, whether it's just a marriage or something like that, or a community, like a fellowship, Franciscan fellowship, or an actual residential community, is that it's like a file that just sort of, works on all those little sticky bits, that are sticking out, and just kind of files you down to where you're a lot smoother than you started out. But it's not a very pleasant process always. I mean, this isn't a question I'm going to ask anyone to answer out loud, but have you ever had anyone in your fellowship that you found it hard to get along with? I mean, I had to go into therapy over one of ours. And this is the truth. This is absolutely the truth, because she's a wonderful person with a terrific ministry, and she's just a dear person who I love so much. But I was not liking the person I was becoming around her, and I got some counseling, and I learned a little bit, and we had a little bit of a timeout, and now we're best friends. And I think that if I hadn't been pushed very unwillingly to go through a time-consuming and expensive process of trying to sort out who I was in conflict, I wouldn't have been able to regain that friendship, which is very, very dear to me. And so, that was another cell. And those relationships, boy, they can teach us a lot. Mostly, how inept we are at handling them. Who else? Yes?
My disability. And it's taught me to get on with things. Just get on with it, Ross. Just get on with it. It makes me really furious when I can't do some things. But, just to get on with it. Live in the moment and enjoy, life. Because,
If you were entirely able-bodied, do you think your attitude do you think you would have learned that? I mean, do you think that would have just kind of come naturally to you? So something you learned in the cell. I saw somebody else back here. Yes.
First of all, what you were saying about retirement, don't count on it. It might get more worrisome than the job was. And that's what my retirement has become.
Yeah.
It's
God.
My cell is my family unit, and what has it taught me? It should have taught me patience. It hasn't quite yet. And it should have taught me humility, but it hasn't quite taught me that yet.
Yeah, we can tell. She's sounding very humble to me. Yeah, you might be the last to know, but I think you can trust us to tell you that, yeah, you are. I'm sorry, I totally cut you off. What were you saying?
Yes, that's what I was going to say, yeah.
started thinking about. It just sort of came to me the other day. But I suspect that and actually, other people have talked about this too, like befriending the shadow and all of that stuff. But I do suspect that the very things that we grapple with the most are somehow going to be transformed into a kind of adornment of our soul. God is so powerful and so clever about stuff like that, that I do think that it's the things that we just, there's a kind of internal cell. There's a very positive kind of way of thinking about that, but kind of on the flip side, the shadow side, there's a cell of living with ourselves and the things that we would most love to escape about ourselves. But I think that they can teach us so much that they can, in fact, become the most beautiful thing about us, It's like maybe being born with a birthmark on the face that becomes defined as a beauty spot,
There's a therapist in Wellington now long dead who said the pearl of great price is found in the rubbish bin.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was sort of grappling toward. Yeah, I'd love that. Anybody else? Yes.
My cell would be, and has been, sitting in front of my computer with a job to do and feeling inadequate, powerless, incompetent, everything else. And knowing perfectly well there's lots of people around who would be quite shocked at my inability or my lack of total interest in it. And I can admire all the amazing things, and I can admire the miracle that RT is and wonder at it all, but I'd much rather be in my garden, actually.
My sister, I so identify with what you just said. And I work in a field where, to be honest, I have one of the greatest jobs in the world. I get paid to talk about things that interest me to people who are forced to sit there and listen. It's a great gig, and really it's, part of the difficulty of the struggle with it is the fact that it's supposed to be so great. And that I imagine, and this probably is my imagination, but I imagine that the people around me all love it way more than I do. Yeah, because it has things about it that I really do love. I love the students, I love the interactions with them. I love the one-on-one, which is much less exhausting to me than the big, blah, blah, blah. But I think I'm supposed to love it. And so having to pretend that you love it, or having to sort of go through the days making it look like you love it, is doubly exhausting, So, now the secret's out. But it sounds like the cells are being very instructive places. The cell as school for the soul. As a tertiary, I've already said that I might own a work wardrobe that's not strictly consistent with what Francis would have approved of. I've got the endless supply of jewelry coming from a very generous husband. I have a lot of stuff. And yet, the work that I do in the world continually brings me back to my own sense of poverty. So it's like, in spite of all the abundance of things that I have, I think I can still experience something of Franciscan poverty just through my own sense of finiteness, inadequacy, limitation. And so, when I said that I was going to use poverty and simplicity interchangeably, it's largely because I think at this level of experiencing our own inadequacy, our own desperate need for help, then it doesn't really matter whether your vow is poverty or simplicity. It pretty much comes to the same thing, I think. The poverty that I'm talking about has helped me find a little bit more of that focus that I talked about that Francis and Claire had by stripping away things that would have gotten in the way of it. So worldly ambition is a big one. I'm never going to be a famous sociologist. And in graduate school, I was taught that being a famous sociologist was what it was all about. You know, you publish your stuff, people get to know who you are, they think you're brilliant, they invite you to conferences, they put you on every committee, you go to all these meetings. But, you know, that's never going to happen to me. And frankly, it took a while to come to terms with that, and it can still be a struggle at times. But what I've also discovered is that not being famous is really liberating because I have a famous husband, and I watch him get on airplanes and fly across the continent all the time. And so if people thought I had all the answers, then I would be spending a lot more time on airplanes going to places much less nice than this. So, you know, that's kind of a cool thing to not be famous, actually. The poverty is stripped away my fantasies of self-sufficiency and serenity. I think that there is this good kind of serenity, but my kind of carnal fantasy about serenity is all about a serenity based on the notion that I've got it covered. You know, I've got it under control, I know what I'm doing, so I can move serenely through the day because nothing's going to happen that's going to challenge me. And I've had enough humiliating defeat in my life to know that that's not how it goes. That's just not true. And I can't entertain that fantasy anymore. The poverty that I've experienced is from constantly being required to do things that I don't know how to do. I don't know how to teach so that all my students love me. I reach a few, but one of the things that has constantly turned me back to is the realization that Jesus didn't reach them all either. Now, do you think you're going to be a better teacher than Jesus? You know, in fact, when Jesus was at his most revealing and startling and direct, think of the Bread of Life discourse. What happened with his students? They walked out of class. You know, I mean, they didn't receive it very well. I'm guessing his course evaluations that day were not positive. So why would I think mine would always be great? I don't know how to teach. I reach a few. I've reached a few. I actually had a student, this is like one of the great moments, okay? This is why I'm still at it. I have a former student who learned about modern slavery in one of my classes. And so she was part of a group of students who actually started a campus anti-trafficking organization to raise awareness and so on. And I was just so impressed with those students. I just loved them so much. And so after she graduated, she went off and has been involved at first a volunteer level and now at a professional level on working with young girls and young women in the Seattle Puget Sound area who have been trafficking victims. And so she just wrote me the other day to say she's got this new gig where she's actually living in a residential facility that provides 2 years of stable residency for people who have been women who have been victims of trafficking. And so she wrote me to say, hey, professor, I'm doing this, and I learned it in your class, and I just went, oh, it's not a bad sell, really, you know? It's not a bad sell at all. I don't know how to write books that reach people. I mean, they reach some, but, you know, I've had to kind of let go of the fantasy of writing the bestseller that's going to reach, like, a lot of people. I kind of come to think that I'll know that I have arrived as an author when I see my books in the supermarket or the airport. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. Actually, my mother has said that if I would just write one best-selling bodice ripper, like one really, like if I would write a 50 Shades of Grey, then, you know, under a pseudonym, which I think was really good advice, then I could retire and do whatever I want and write all the serious stuff I like, you know. And I think Mom's kind of onto something there, but I'm not. If I write that book, I'm not telling you. And I don't know how to give talks, like every time I'm supposed to give a talk and I go to put something together, I just beg God to slip something in there somewhere that will say something to someone at some point, because I don't know how to do this. The only thing I do know, because I've been forced to learn it, is how to admit that I don't know anything. It's really true that the more time you spend in school, the more you realize you don't know. And I'll tell you, when I got a PhD, I realized that I knew nothing at all. And it's a good lesson. It's a good lesson. So I obviously have a long way to go and a lot to learn about inner poverty. But in terms of that intense focus that I talked about earlier, my job has forced me to a bit more of that kind of focus. I'm thinking of the kind of focus, have you seen footage of people in a flood and they're standing on their rooftop and there's a helicopter overhead? And the water is, licking at the roof tiles, and they're, that kind of focus, that's real focus. That's the focus of desperation. I think of all those images from Hurricane Katrina, it's like that is your one shot at surviving, and that's real focus. Most of us have to be pushed to that kind of poverty. Most of us, it's easy to give away our extra clothes because we always have more, Most of us, we can afford to kind of let go of an extra jacket that we don't really need to see us through the winter. But to let go of our illusions of self-sufficiency and control, I don't think most of us would go there voluntarily. I certainly wouldn't. Definitely not. So that whole connection between listening and obeying, most of the time I'm not listening. I'm just zoning out, But when I do listen, I've learned that voice, that eternal whisper that Kelly mentioned, is the only one that will tell me how to survive. And that's what my cell has taught me. When Jesus, I'm going to conclude with this. When Jesus asked John's disciples, "What are you looking for?" I think their answer was probably truer than they realized. Where do you live? At one level, this could be a really simple kind of conversation. What are you looking for? Where do you live? It sounds kind of commonplace enough, but I think that, at some level, they were maybe asking, Lord, where are you, and can I be anywhere near there? In the last session, I identified 2 points or purposes of simplicity, and one of them is to limit our greedy grasping, our consumerist kind of mentality and practice, a life where it's all about me and my ego and my agenda and my needs and so on. And so inner simplicity is an emptying out of all of that. It's a kenosis, an emptying out, but it's not just emptying for its own sake, for the sake of being empty. It's what I've come to think of as the spiritual vacuum effect, where water, we were hearing about this last night, water seeks the lowest level, right? But I think that the Spirit of God seeks emptiness. And so when we're emptied out, because we either have the guts to empty ourselves voluntarily, or because life empties us and essentially carves us out, however painfully, I think the Spirit rushes into those empty places and fills them. And Teresa of Avila liked to quote a place in the Psalms where it says, "Thou hast enlarged my heart." I love that. She loved it. I love that too. But think about what it would be like to have your heart enlarged. I'm picturing someone in there sort of, pushing at the sides, like expanding. I'm thinking that sounds kind of painful. But it's to make more room for God. And so, it sounds like it's worth it. Likewise, the exchange, as I've said, between Jesus and John's disciples sounds ordinary at one level. But I think there's a deeper truth there. As I've said, what is the deepest desire of your heart? I want to find you. I want to abide with you. I want to be where you are. So what does Jesus say to them? Oh, you're so not ready for that. No, he issues an invitation. Come and see. Come and see. And the truth is, they're not ready for it. They're nowhere near ready for it. And it's going to take a long process of self-emptying and stripping away their own assumptions, their own agendas. I mean, even after the resurrection, they're still going, are you going to restore the kingdom of Israel now? You know, like they make me feel bright sometimes, and I know that's a bad thing. But we'll get there eventually, right? But what's there? Where is there? What is it? What is this leading to? And this is the second purpose of simplicity that I talked about last night, which is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So, my challenge to you, your homework assignment, is to continue to think more about your cell and what it's taught you, as it taught you to will the one thing. Has it brought you any closer to sort of tuning out those other voices, the mall effect, and focusing with that kind of urgency, with that intensity that Francis and Claire had on the one thing? I believe that the way to inner simplicity is to personally experience, to live the Paschal mystery. Nothing that has not died can live forever. I mean, Jesus taught us that. And some things within us need to die so that they can be resurrected. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote those wonderful words about, when Christ calls us, he bids us come and die. Not because he doesn't love us, but because he does. And so, there are some things that just need to die and stay dead, right? But there's much within us that needs to die so that it can be resurrected in its truest form. So I don't know about you, but I am still fighting these battles. But I take hope from something that Thomas Merton said, and I'm going to just quote this to you for now, with apologies for his masculine pronouns, but it was that time. Okay, so here's Merton, and I spent the last Lent pretty much clinging to this quotation, so I'll share it with you. The whole Christian life is a life in which the more we progress, the poorer we get, so that the man who has progressed most is totally poor. He has to depend directly on God. He's got nothing left in himself. So one more time. The whole Christian life is a life in which the more we progress, the poorer we get, so that the man who has progressed most is totally poor. He has to depend directly on God. He's got nothing left in himself. This is the truth. This is a truth that Francis and Claire understood and embraced. And I think this is exactly why they were so in love with poverty. Because they saw the connection between poverty and Christ, and they desired to embrace Christ, and they knew that embracing poverty was a surefire way to get there. Elsa has pointed out to me a prayer that I think we could close with for this session. So, the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Eternal God, grant to us this day and every day such readiness and delight in following Christ that whether our lives are long or short, we shall have lived abundantly. Amen.